I came across this story not long ago, and for some reason it just stayed with me. You know how some stories slip away after a few minutes, but others hold onto your thoughts? This one held on. Maybe because it starts so quietly. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just a simple moment in a small town, yet it carries a feeling that grows the more you listen. It's about a rancher, one of those men people don't notice at first. The kind who keeps to himself, speaks only when needed, and walks through life with calm steps. But sometimes the quietest people leave the deepest marks. And there was something different about him, something steady, something warm beneath the silence. I didn't expect the story to turn the way it did, but the more I heard, the more I understood why it touched so many hearts. The woman at the center of it wasn't looking for attention either. She had just arrived in town, trying to find a new rhythm. But fate has this strange habit of weaving two lives together when no one is watching. And that's exactly what happened, on one long night neither of them planned for. What caught me was how everything unfolded without rush, without big words, just actions. Real, simple actions that revealed who a person truly is. And once the night began, it didn't stop at one moment, or even two. It went on 3 times, each moment pulling them closer without either of them trying. And that's when the story truly begins. He was the kind of man people noticed without him ever trying. Not because he spoke loudly or demanded attention, but because there was something solid about him, something grounded. You could see it in the way he walked across his land, steady and sure, like every step had a purpose. You could see it in the way he worked from sunrise to sunset without a single complaint. Ranch work is never easy, but he made it look natural, like his body and the land understood each other. People in town respected him, even if they didn't know him well. They said he was a man of few words and many actions, and honestly, that tells you more about him than anything else. He didn't go around trying to be liked. He didn't try to prove himself. And maybe that was the reason people trusted him so easily. When he said he'd do something, he did it. When someone needed help, he showed up quietly, handled the problem, and left before anyone could turn it into a big deal. He didn't care for praise. He didn't care for attention. He cared about doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. He lived alone on a wide stretch of ranchland his family had passed down for generations. Some folks wondered why he never moved to the city or tried something different. But the truth was simple for him. The ranch was home. The open fields, the sound of wind in the grass, the horses he raised, those things meant more to him than crowds or noise or anything the city offered. He wasn't lonely. At least he never said he was. Maybe he didn't even realize what was missing. His neighbors talked about how dependable he was. If someone's fence broke, he'd be there before they asked. If a storm was coming, he'd ride out and check on elderly families who lived farther from town. He knew how to fix almost anything: gates, roofs, tractors, engines. And he never charged a penny unless someone forced him to take it. Most days he kept to himself, working, thinking, moving through life with quiet purpose. It wasn't that he avoided people. He just didn't need much from them. He was comfortable in his silence. But people who paid attention noticed the little things. The way he would slow down when talking to older folks, making sure they didn't feel rushed. The way he would speak softly to nervous animals until they calmed under his touch. The way he listened, not just with his ears but with his eyes, his posture, his patience. Some men talk big and act small. He was the opposite. Small talk didn't suit him. He preferred to show who he was through what he did. And still, despite all these things people admired about him, he never seemed to see himself the way others did. He saw chores that needed doing, problems that needed solving, responsibilities that came with the land he loved. He measured his worth by how reliable he was, not by how much praise he received. It's funny how the strongest people rarely see their own strength. Sometimes, in the evenings, townsfolk would see him riding his horse along the outer fences, checking for breaks before the sun dipped below the horizon. Some evenings he'd stop by the general store for supplies. He'd tip his hat politely, speak a few short words, and then leave before anyone could pull him into long conversation. People were used to that. They didn't take it personally. That was just who he was. There was talk now and then about how he'd make a good husband, a good father, a good leader, but he never seemed interested in the idea. He wasn't unfriendly, just settled, grounded in his routines, comfortable in his quiet world. For him, life was simple: wake early, work hard, care for the land, help where needed, rest, repeat. It wasn't that he avoided love. It just hadn't found him in a way that made sense. Not yet. He had this calm presence that made people feel safe even if he didn't say a word. If a child fell in the street, he'd be the first to kneel down and check if they were hurt. If a storm knocked down power lines, he'd help clear the road before the county even knew what happened. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. Helping was as natural to him as breathing. People sometimes wondered what he thought about during those long rides across his fields. Maybe he thought about the cattle and the fences and the work waiting for him. Or maybe he thought about nothing at all, letting the sound of nature fill the silence. He wasn't the type to share his thoughts easily, but those who spent time around him understood something important. He felt deeply. He just expressed it through actions instead of words. That's what made this story so different from others. Because when a man like him does something, anything, it carries meaning. Even the smallest gesture feels larger, and when he goes out of his way, when he steps beyond his quiet routines, people notice. What he did on that night wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't something he planned. It wasn't something he expected to repeat not once, not twice, but 3 times. But something inside him reacted before he could think. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was kindness. Maybe it was something deeper he wasn't ready to name. People say a person's true nature shows in unexpected moments. And if that's true, then his nature was clearer than ever that night, steady, protective, and overwhelmingly gentle. He didn't know that his actions were going to change the way someone looked at him forever. He didn't know that one night would reveal the kind of man he truly was in a way words never could. All he knew was that someone needed help, and for him, that was enough. She came into that small town the way a soft breeze enters a quiet room, barely noticed at first, but leaving a feeling you can't quite ignore once it passes. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, and she didn't try to make a place for herself. She simply arrived, carrying more silence than belongings, and people sensed right away that her life hadn't been easy. You could see it in the way she held her shoulders, not slumped, but gently guarded. You could see it in her eyes too, kind eyes, but with a tiredness that didn't come from lack of sleep. It came from life itself. She had moved into a small place right on the edge of town, the kind of home most people only choose when they want peace, or when they're trying to heal from something they don't speak about. No one knew her full story. She didn't offer it, and no one forced her to. In a town that valued privacy and respect, people understood the meaning of her quiet. Sometimes silence is its own kind of introduction. Even so, she wasn't unfriendly. She greeted people softly when she passed them. She bought her groceries with a gentle smile. She always spoke in a calm voice, as if she didn't want to disturb anyone. Some people wondered if she had always been that way, or if life had shaped her into something softer, more delicate. But there was strength in her too, a quiet strength that comes from surviving storms no one else has seen. She tried to settle into her new life slowly. Most mornings she sat on her porch with a warm drink, letting the early sun touch her face. Sometimes she'd watch the birds. Sometimes she'd just breathe, like she was teaching her heart to relax again. Healing doesn't happen in one day, and she knew that. She wasn't rushing anything. She didn't have the energy for rushing anymore. But even though she tried to live quietly, things weren't easy. The house she moved into needed repairs. The land around it was rough. The small road leading to her driveway would often give her trouble after rain. She wasn't used to country work. She came from somewhere different, somewhere with more pavement and less dirt. Still, she tried to handle things on her own because she didn't want to burden anyone. She had lived long enough feeling like her problems were hers alone to carry. But in a place like that, people notice, especially one particular person. The rancher had already seen her a few times from a distance. He wasn't the type to stare, but every now and then he'd spot her walking to the post office or carrying supplies from her car. She moved gently, like someone trying to get used to new ground. He didn't know her story either, but he had a sense for people, a quiet instinct that told him when someone was hurting or when someone needed space. And from the moment he first saw her, he sensed a mixture of both. She didn't know he paid attention. She didn't know that one day, out on his horse checking fence lines, he slowed down when he noticed her struggling with a stubborn gait. She didn't see him pause and watch for a moment, trying to decide whether she wanted help or preferred to handle it herself. She didn't know that he rode on only after making sure she managed it safely. He didn't want to impose. He just wanted her to be okay. Her days were quiet, but loneliness has a way of sneaking into even the smallest cracks. She wasn't lonely because she lacked company. She was lonely because she lacked connection. Real connection. The kind she had once hoped for but never truly found. So she stayed gentle, polite, distant. Not because she didn't want people near, but because she didn't know if her heart could handle being hurt again. She often thought about starting fresh. New friends, new routines, a new life. But every time she tried to push herself into something, something inside held her back. Healing isn't linear, and she carried memories that didn't fade easily. But she wanted to try. She wanted to feel human again, seen again, valued again. She just didn't know how to start. The rancher was the last person she expected to cross paths with. She knew of him, everyone in town did. They called him dependable, steady, quiet. Some women whispered about how good-hearted he was, how he'd make the perfect husband someday. She never paid much attention to those comments. Men like him didn't cross into the lives of women like her. Not in her mind. But life doesn't ask permission before weaving two paths together. The first time she spoke to him, it was nothing special. Just a small good morning when they passed each other near the general store. He tipped his hat politely, said a soft greeting and walked on. She didn't think much of it, just a simple moment gone in seconds. But something about his calm presence lingered with her a little longer than she expected. She didn't know then how important he would become. She didn't know that this quiet man, who barely said 5 words to her, would soon show her more kindness in one night than she had received in years. She didn't know that the steadiness she admired from afar was something she would one day feel wrapped around her like a shield. She only knew that she was trying to rebuild her life, piece by gentle piece. She didn't know that someone was watching from a respectful distance, someone who understood silence better than anyone, someone who didn't need her story to care about her well-being. And she certainly didn't know that fate was waiting for just the right moment to intertwine their lives, starting with the night everything changed. That night began like any other, quiet and unimportant, the kind of night no one thinks twice about. The sky was heavy, though clouds gathering in a slow, silent warning. The air felt thick, like something was about to shift. She didn't notice at first. She was busy trying to settle in for the evening, finishing a few small chores around her place. But sometimes life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it just arrives, uninvited, with lessons and people you never expected. The first problem came just after the sun slid behind the mountains. A loud crack echoed from the back of her property. She startled, unsure if it was an animal or the wind or something she needed to worry about. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, her heart beating a little faster than she wanted to admit. When she reached her fence line, she found one of the posts broken clean through, leaning into the ground. She didn't know how to fix it, and for a moment she just stood there, unsure where to begin. That's when she saw a dim light approaching from the darkness. A horse, steady steps, and then him, moving toward her without a hint of hesitation. He must have heard the brake from his land or noticed something was off while riding nearby. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't waste time. He just dismounted, gave her a gentle nod, and started working. His hands moved with quiet certainty, lifting the fallen post, resetting the wire, making it stable again. She tried to help, but he shook his head lightly, not unkindly, just letting her know he had it. When he finished, he stepped back, brushed dirt off his hands, and finally met her eyes. He didn't say much, only something simple like, "It's fixed, should hold for now." She thanked him softly, but before she could say more, he tipped his hat and disappeared into the night the way he came, calm, quiet, almost unnoticed. She thought that was the end of it, just a helpful stranger in the dark. But the night had more in store. Not even an hour later, the wind picked up sharply, rattling her windows. She turned on the porch light and saw branches blowing across her small yard. Then, before she could react, the power flickered and died. The house fell into shadow. She stood still for a moment, letting her eyes adjust. The storm wasn't even strong yet, but something had snapped nearby. She wrapped herself in a jacket and stepped outside again, trying to understand what had happened. She didn't have to wonder long. Down the road, she saw the faint glow of a flashlight moving with purpose. He was back. He must have noticed the outage hit her place harder than the others nearby. Without being asked, he came straight to her property, checking the line that ran along her driveway. And there it was. A fallen limb had pulled part of the wire down, not fully broken, but close enough to cause trouble. She watched him climb up onto the fence, his movements careful but confident, securing things temporarily so her lights would come back on once the line stabilized. He worked in silence except for the sounds of the wind and his steady breathing. She held the flashlight for him even though he brought his own. She wanted to do something, anything, to make it easier. When the power clicked back inside her home a few minutes later, she felt a strange sense of comfort she hadn't felt in a long time. He stepped down, thanked her softly for holding the light, then gave that quiet nod again. That simple nod meant more than a whole speech from any other man. And just like before, he slipped into the darkness without waiting for anything else. She stood there for a moment, watching the spot where he disappeared. 2 times now. 2 different problems. 2 times he showed up without her calling for help. She wondered if he even realized how unusual that was, how rare it felt. Most people help once, but twice, in the same night. That started to feel like something more, something deeper. She had barely settled back inside when the rain arrived. It came in fast, tapping against her windows in scattered bursts. She tried to relax, telling herself everything was fine now. But storms don't always stop with small warnings. When the downpour grew heavier, she heard a sharp crash outside. Her heart jumped. She went to the window and saw part of her porch roof sagging. A loose beam had cracked under the sudden weight of wet wood that hadn't been maintained well before she moved in. Fear shot through her. If that beam fell completely, it could take part of the overhang with it, or worse, injure her if she stepped outside at the wrong moment. She didn't know what to do. She thought about trying to prop it up, but the rain was pouring too hard and she didn't have the tools. And then, unbelievably, through the sheets of rain, she saw a familiar figure. He came running this time. Not riding, not walking calmly. Running. His hat pulled low, his jacket soaked, rain crashing down around him. He didn't stop to explain how he knew. Maybe he heard the crash from his property. Maybe he was already checking on nearby homes. Maybe, just maybe, he felt something pull him toward her place in that moment. He reached the porch and assessed the damage with one quick glance. Then he told her to stay back, his voice firm but gentle. She listened. She trusted him without thinking about why. He climbed up, secured the beam temporarily, and tied it with rope to hold until the storm passed. The rain soaked him completely, dripping from his hair, his jacket, his sleeves. But he didn't stop. Not once. She watched him, her heartbeat unsteady. Something about this man, this night, these 3 moments, it reached deep into her in a way she hadn't expected. And he wasn't doing any of it for praise. He wasn't doing it to impress her. He was doing it because that's who he was. A man who stepped in when others stepped back. A man who didn't think twice about helping someone alone in the dark. When he finished securing the beam, he turned toward her. Rain slid down his face, but his eyes were calm. He didn't mention the storm. He didn't mention the risk. He just checked that she was safe. She thanked him again, her voice softer than before. He nodded, almost shyly, and stepped off the porch into the rain, walking back toward his land without a single word about what he had done. 3 times in one night, and she felt something in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Something warm, something steady, something she couldn't name yet but could no longer ignore. When the storm finally eased and the night grew quiet again, she sat in her small living room with the soft hum of electricity filling the space. Normally, she didn't even notice that sound, but tonight it felt like proof that she wasn't alone in the world, not really. She kept thinking about him, how he had shown up 3 different times without expecting anything, how he had moved through the dark with purpose, how he had looked at her after each task as if checking she was truly okay. Not because he wanted thanks, not because he wanted attention, but because he cared in a way that felt genuine, gentle, and almost protective. She wrapped her arms around herself, but not out of fear. It was something else, something quieter, warmer, something she hadn't felt in so long that it almost startled her with its softness. She replayed each moment of the night in her mind, each of his actions unfolding like pieces of a puzzle coming together. She remembered the first time he stepped toward her fence, how steady his hands were, how calm his expression was even in the fading light. She remembered the second time, the way he handled the downed line with practiced ease, how he thanked her for holding the flashlight even though he was the one doing all the hard work. But it was the third moment, the moment he ran through the rain without hesitation, that stayed with her the longest. There was something different about that moment, something revealing. He didn't come because it was convenient. He didn't come because he happened to be nearby. He came because he cared enough to cross the storm for her safety. That wasn't kindness. That wasn't neighborly duty. That was something deeper, something that came from instinct rather than thought. She sat back, letting her mind drift, letting herself feel things she had always pushed away before. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She wasn't used to this kind of gentleness either. Most men she had known in her past had been loud, unpredictable, or careless with her heart. But this man, this rancher, he was the opposite of everything she had grown tired of. He was steady, predictable in the best way, gentle without being fragile, strong without being hard. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was depth. And the more she thought about him, the more she felt her heart soften toward him, slowly and carefully, like a flower opening after a long winter. She didn't tell herself she was falling for him. That would have felt too sudden, too bold. But she felt something awakening inside her, something she thought had died long ago. She felt admiration first, real admiration for the kind of man he was when he thought no one was watching. She thought about how rare that was, how many people put on a show when eyes were on them, but only a few lived with quiet integrity. He didn't help her to impress her. He helped her because helping was part of him. Character wasn't something he tried to build. It was something built into him already. She remembered how he looked at her, not in a way that overwhelmed her or made her shrink. His gaze was gentle, respectful, like he wanted to make sure she was all right without stepping into her space. She noticed how he never asked for anything in return, not a drink, not a conversation, not praise. He didn't linger to see if she would ask him to stay. He just made sure her world was safe again before slipping back into the darkness. And that, more than anything, made her chest tighten in a way she hadn't felt in years. She felt safe around him, truly safe. And that feeling settled deep in her bones, unexpected and powerful. It wasn't just what he did, it was how he did it. Quietly, carefully, thoughtfully. She found herself smiling softly when she thought about him running through the rain, his hat pulled low, his jacket heavy with water but his determination unshaken. Who does that for someone they barely know? Who risks discomfort and a storm just to make sure a beam doesn't fall on a woman alone in her home? A man with a good heart. A rare kind of man. And that realization made something inside her shift. A gentle longing rose slowly, like a tide she hadn't felt in so long. A longing not for excitement or romance or anything dramatic, just for his presence. For a man like him to be in her life. For someone who would show up not because he wanted something, but because he cared. For comfort she hadn't let herself dream of. For connection without fear. She touched her chest lightly, feeling her heartbeat calming and warming all at once. She didn't know what he felt. She didn't know if he saw her as more than a stranger who needed help. But she knew what she was beginning to feel, even if she couldn't say the word out loud yet. It was small. It was fragile. But it was real. The idea of him didn't frighten her. It steadied her, softened her, gave her a feeling she had almost forgotten. A feeling of wanting to be seen by someone worth being seen by. The room around her felt different now. Not because the storm had passed or because the lights were back on, but because her world had shifted in a quiet, gentle way. She looked toward the window where the rain still slid down the glass, and she imagined him walking back across his land, soaked but calm, probably thinking the night was nothing out of the ordinary. He didn't realize what his actions meant. He didn't know the impact he had made, but she did. She knew it with every steady breath she took. And as she sat there, warmed by the soft hum of electricity and the memory of him standing in the rain, something inside her whispered a truth she wasn't ready to speak but could no longer deny. A man like him wasn't just someone to admire. He was someone a heart could build a life with. And for the first time in a long time, her heart wanted something. Something simple, something strong, something that felt like home. The next morning, the storm had left the world washed clean, like the earth itself had taken a deep breath. The air smelled of wet soil and fresh grass, and the sky stretched wide and pale, soft enough to make anyone pause. She stepped onto her porch with a warm drink in her hands, still feeling the echo of the night before, that quiet pull inside her chest that hadn't faded even after sleep. It wasn't just the memory of what he did. It was the feeling behind it, that steady presence she couldn't stop thinking about. As she stood there, she noticed her repaired fence holding firm, the loosened beams still tied neatly, and the stretch of road where the line had once sparked now calm and ordinary. Everything looked normal again, yet nothing felt normal inside her. Each small fix told its own story, a silent reminder of a man who moved like a storm himself, quiet, powerful, changing things without asking for permission or praise. She found herself glancing toward the wide fields beyond her property. She didn't expect to see him, but part of her hoped she would. She wasn't sure what she would even say if he appeared. Words felt too simple, too small compared to the weight of what he had done for her. Gratitude was part of it, of course, but there was something deeper too, something she tried to describe to herself but couldn't yet shape into sentences. When she walked into town later that day for a few supplies, she sensed the whispers before she heard them fully. Small towns move news around faster than the wind, especially when it involves someone as well known as the rancher. A couple of older folks nodded knowingly as she passed. Someone else smiled at her a little too long, that curious look people get when they're trying to figure out if a rumor might be true. She wasn't used to that kind of attention, but she didn't feel embarrassed, just surprised. She overheard fragments of talk while waiting to pay for her groceries. "Went out 3 times, they said," one woman murmured. "That man's got a heart bigger than he lets on," another replied. "He's always been like that, but 3 times in one night, that means something." She turned away before they noticed her listening. Her cheeks warmed, not with discomfort but with a strange new understanding. People saw him as reliable, trustworthy, admirable. And now they were starting to wonder if there was something between them. She didn't know how to handle that thought yet, but she didn't deny that something inside her had shifted. On her walk home, she thought more about him, about the kind of life he lived. She imagined his morning, probably already at work before the sun even thought about rising, tending to his animals, checking his fences, riding across the open land with that same calm expression he always wore. He wasn't the sort of man who would sit and think about feelings. He didn't analyze things the way she did. He simply lived with honesty, with effort, with a quiet heart that had always seemed enough for him. She wondered what he thought of her, whether he thought of her at all, whether he had noticed the way she looked at him after the 3rd time he helped her, That soft moment she hoped he didn't see even though she almost wished he had. She wasn't expecting anything from him. Not promises, not declarations, not anything grand. She didn't want to push him. But she felt something and she couldn't hide from it anymore. Back home, she walked around her property again, touching the fence, the repaired beam, the ground where he had run through the rain. Each one held a kind of warmth now, as if his presence lingered in the places he'd touched. She sat on her porch and let the silence wrap around her, thinking about how rare it was to feel seen without being overwhelmed, protected without being controlled, cared for without anyone demanding anything in return. She thought about the past, about how many times she had dealt with people who offered help only when it was easy, who spoke pretty words but vanished when things got hard. The rancher wasn't like that. He didn't talk much. He didn't charm. But when the night tested him, he showed up again and again without being asked. That told her more about his heart than any long confession ever could. As the hours drifted by, she tried to imagine a life where someone like him stood beside her. Not in a romantic fantasy, but in the simple rhythm of everyday life, sharing quiet mornings, working through challenges, finding comfort in each other's presence. The thought felt peaceful, steady, almost natural. And then, as if the universe wanted to pull her even deeper into these thoughts, she saw him. He appeared at the edge of her land, riding slowly, probably checking fences after the storm. He wasn't heading directly toward her house, but close enough that she could see the outline of his figure against the brightening sky. Her heart tightened gently, not with fear, but with a soft ache she hadn't expected. He didn't see her at first. He was focused on the ground, scanning for damage. When he finally lifted his head and his eyes met hers from across the distance, he paused. Just a small pause, but it was enough. He tipped his hat lightly, that familiar, respectful gesture she had come to recognize. She raised her hand in a quiet wave, her breath catching for a moment. He didn't approach her porch. He didn't call out. He simply gave that small nod, steady, gentle, meaningful, and continued riding along the fence. But the moment lingered between them like an unspoken truth. That nod said more than words. It told her he cared. It told her he remembered the night too. It told her she wasn't just another task he completed before moving on. As he continued down the line of her property, she watched him, feeling something inside her settle into place. A soft, undeniable certainty she hadn't felt in so long. Not a decision, not an answer, not a conclusion. Just the quiet beginning of something her heart wasn't afraid to want anymore.